It was a Sunday afternoon when I walked into my own house and felt like a stranger. We had family over for my wife Jenna's birthday, a small gathering, just close friends and family in the backyard. It was one of those easy, sunny afternoons that makes you feel like everything is exactly where it should be. Burgers were on the grill, kids were running around, and I was busy grabbing a cooler of drinks from the garage. I stepped back into the kitchen and paused at the doorway when I saw Jenna. She was talking to someone just out of sight in the living room, but her tone was softer than usual, like she was trying to keep her voice down. I thought nothing of it at first, she was always on her phone or chatting up someone. But then I heard her laugh. Not just any laugh, either. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months, maybe years, one that caught me off guard. It was real, almost flirtatious, with a hint of something I hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. I leaned a bit closer, trying to see who was there. Then he stepped into view, a guy I'd met just once or twice before, Jenna's new colleague, Alex. He wasn't even supposed to be here. I vaguely remembered Jenna inviting him last minute because he had nowhere else to go for the weekend. He was younger, fit, and just a little too comfortable standing in my living room, laughing with my wife like he belonged there. Something about it hit me wrong. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, or maybe it was just that the laugh wasn't meant for me. I shook it off, joining everyone outside, handing out beers, chatting with our friends, acting normal. But as the day went on, I couldn't unsee it, the way her eyes would drift back toward the house whenever she thought no one was looking. I tried to brush it off, that strange feeling gnawing at me. But something kept tugging at me, refusing to let go. I told myself it was paranoia. A bad vibe. A misunderstanding. But no matter how much I reasoned with myself, every small moment from that day stuck like splinters in my mind. Jenna's little glances toward the house, the way she leaned in when Alex talked, how she laughed a little louder when he was nearby. It all felt wrong. A week passed, and that nagging feeling didn't leave. I began to notice patterns I'd either missed or ignored. Jenna was out more often, claiming work dinners or team building nights, things I'd heard about from her before but never this frequently. And it wasn't just that. The energy around her had changed. She'd started dressing a bit differently, 2 outfits she hadn't touched in years, perfume I barely recognized. She'd spend extra time in front of the mirror, which hadn't been her routine in a long while. I thought it might be her trying to recapture her youth, or maybe she was just feeling good about herself. But deep down, it didn't add up. So, I decided to trust my gut. That Friday, when she said she'd be going out for a work event with her colleagues, I told her I'd be working late too. But I didn't go to work. Instead, I waited until I was sure she'd left and then followed. I kept a distance, feeling ridiculous, like some stalker lurking in the shadows, but I couldn't turn back now. She parked at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place you'd pick for a quiet date, not a work dinner. I stayed a few blocks away, watching from the car. And then, there he was, Alex. He was waiting by the entrance, dressed way too casually for a work event. Jenna walked up, greeted him with that same laugh from her birthday, and they disappeared inside. I didn't want to be one of those men, the jealous, insecure husband who spies on his wife. But I also wasn't about to let this go without knowing what was really going on. I followed them into the restaurant, keeping to the back where I could see without being seen. They sat together, not across from each other like you'd expect coworkers to do, but side by side, close. Her body language, her gestures, the way she looked at him. It all confirmed what I was afraid to admit. I watched them for half an hour, trying to convince myself that maybe it was innocent, that maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But then she touched his hand, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, his hand lingering on hers, like they'd done it 100 times before. There was no mistaking it, this wasn't just a dinner with a friend or colleague. This was something else entirely. My stomach churned, the anger rising up in waves, but I forced myself to stay put. I couldn't explode here, not without making a scene that would lead nowhere but embarrassment. So I left. I sat in my car, trying to process it all, trying to remember every little sign I'd ignored, every moment that now seemed to point to this betrayal. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did everyone around us know? Had she fallen out of love with me long before this? The idea that I'd become blind to my own marriage was like a slap in the face. I didn't go home right away. I drove around, ended up at a nearby park, and just sat there, replaying everything in my mind. I'd invested so much in this life we built together. We'd gone through good years, tough years, and had 2 kids who trusted us to hold the family together. Now, all that seemed like a charade, a lie I'd been feeding myself, thinking we were just like any normal couple going through a few rough patches. But now it was clear, Jenna wasn't just unhappy, she was living a different life behind my back. I didn't confront her that night. When I finally walked through the door, she was already home, lying on the couch, scrolling on her phone. She looked up and gave me a casual hey, like everything was normal. Like she hadn't just spent the evening in a dimly lit booth, holding hands with another man. She didn't even ask where I'd been or why I was home later than I'd said I'd be. As the days passed, I watched her more carefully, piecing together more fragments of her deceit. She'd tell me she had to run errands, only to be gone for hours. She'd spend weekends working from home, locked away in her office, typing away at her computer, always shutting it down if I got too close. And then there were the phone calls, quiet whispers from the bedroom or the back patio, always at odd times, with a different energy in her voice, one that she used to have when she talked to me. I knew I needed concrete proof before I confronted her. I wasn't going to give her a chance to turn this around on me, to make me out to be the paranoid, possessive husband who'd misinterpreted a friendship. I wanted undeniable evidence, something she couldn't talk her way out of. So I started to dig. I spent nights when she was working late combing through our shared accounts, her social media, her messages on the family computer. She'd left nothing obvious, but there were traces if you looked hard enough. Deleted messages, strange calendar entries, long stretches of time where her location tracking was conveniently turned off. Finally, I hit pay dirt. She'd forgotten to log out of her email one evening, and there it was, a string of emails with Alex, going back months. They weren't graphic or explicit, but the tone was unmistakable. They made plans to meet, talked about things they'd done together, little jokes and nicknames they'd never used around me. It was enough. Enough to shatter any last thread of trust one had in her. I printed everything out, filed it away, and decided I was done playing the clueless husband. The hardest part was keeping it together around our kids, pretending everything was okay while their mother snuck off to be with another man. They'd ask if we could do a family movie night or if we could all go out together for dinner, and I'd make excuses when Jenna was gone, saying she was busy with work or had plans with friends. I knew I couldn't keep that up forever. They'd sense the tension sooner or later. One evening, about a week later, I finally had enough. She came home late, smelling faintly of some cologne that wasn't mine, with that same casual hey as if nothing was wrong. She looked at me with a strange calm, the kind of look you'd give a roommate you barely knew, not the man you'd spent 10 years building a life with. And at that moment, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "So, how's Alex?" Her face went white. She froze, her hand gripping the strap of her purse, like she could stop time by just standing there, not saying anything. "Yeah, Jenna," I said, keeping my voice steady. "How's Alex? Your work friend who you spend half your nights with?" She stammered, trying to find the words, her usual composure slipping for the first time. I could see the gears turning, her mind scrambling to come up with some excuse, some explanation that might make me let this go. Jenna's eyes darted around the room, like she was scanning for a way out, but there was nowhere to go. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to come up with an answer. But I could see it in her eyes, she knew I'd caught her. No room for excuses this time. "Are you going to tell me the truth, Jenna? Or are you planning to stand there, pretending you don't know what I'm talking about?" I was done being patient. She let out a shaky breath and finally found her voice. "Look, it's not what you think, okay?" Her hands clenched the strap of her purse like it could anchor her to reality. "Alex and I, we're just friends. That's all. You're completely overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. "You think I'm overreacting? You know, I might have believed that a month ago. But it's been hard to miss the way you've been sneaking around, always working late, the way you've been dressing up and laughing a little too hard at his jokes." My voice got louder, and I didn't try to hold it back. "I've seen you with him, Jenna. I've seen you together." Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually break down and tell me the truth. But instead, she shook her head and crossed her arms, the faintest hint of a smirk playing at her lips, almost like she was challenging me. "Maybe if you'd been paying attention, you'd understand why I needed someone to talk to in the first place. But you haven't been there. You're always so busy with work, so wrapped up in everything else. You barely even notice me anymore." My jaw clenched as I listened to her try to shift the blame onto me. "That's what you're going with? That it's somehow my fault you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not sneaking around. And honestly, maybe if you took a second to think about what I've been feeling, you wouldn't be so quick to judge me. So that's what this is? My fault, because you're feeling lonely?" I threw my hands up, incredulous. "Don't try to make me the bad guy here. You're the one lying. You're the one sneaking around with him, meeting up at restaurants and God knows where else." She folded her arms tighter across her chest and looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "Fine, if that's what you want to believe. You think I'm cheating? Well, maybe I wouldn't have had to look anywhere else if you actually paid attention to me." There it was, the blame game, all twisted and thrown back at me, like I was supposed to buy that she'd had no choice, that she was some poor, neglected wife who was driven into the arms of another man because I hadn't been paying attention. And maybe, in some universe, there was a sliver of truth there. Maybe I had gotten too caught up in work, too comfortable, too wrapped up in routine. But nothing justified what she was doing. Nothing justified the lies, the sneaking around, the betrayal. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're not even going to own up to it, are you? After all the years we've been together, you don't have the guts to just admit the truth. You'd rather blame me than take responsibility." She looked back at me, her face a mask of defiance. "I already told you. Nothing happened. You're making it into something it's not. But you know what? Maybe it's good that we're having this conversation. Maybe it's time you start realizing that you're not exactly the perfect husband you think you are." I felt a flash of anger, hotter than anything I'd felt before. "Perfect husband? I never claimed to be perfect, Jenna. But I have been faithful. I have been honest. And I don't keep secrets from you, unlike you." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Please. You're acting like I've committed some unforgivable sin. All I've done is go out with a friend. You think I don't know about all those late nights you've had? Or the fact that you spend half your time buried in work instead of being with me? You want to drag my work into this?" I shot back. "I work hard because that's what's needed to keep this family afloat. I work hard so we can have this life, this home. And never once did I think about betraying you while I was doing it. So don't stand there and act like we're on equal footing here. You're the one lying, Jenna. Not me." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. I took a step closer, my voice low and controlled, the fury boiling just under the surface. "I've got proof, Jenna. Emails, messages, all of it. Don't stand there and insult me by pretending this is all in my head. I know exactly what's been going on." Her face went pale, her bravado slipping as the reality hit her. She looked like she wanted to deny it, to argue, but she knew there was no point. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she finally whispered, looking down at the floor, her voice barely audible. I stared at her, feeling a hollow pit form in my stomach. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? What does that even mean, Jenna? That you were planning to have some harmless little fling and then come back to me like nothing happened? That you could just keep this little secret and everything would stay the same?" Her hands trembled as she took a shaky breath. "It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. It was just a distraction. Something to make me feel alive again." "Alive?" I spat, barely able to contain my disgust. "So that's what I am to you? Some dead weight you have to escape from?" Some burden that makes you feel unfulfilled? She looked up, her face twisted with some combination of shame and frustration. You don't understand. You have no idea how lonely I've felt, how trapped. Oh, I think I understand just fine, I said, my voice cold. I understand that you decided your boredom, your lack of excitement, was more important than our marriage. I understand that you threw away years of trust because you couldn't handle a little routine. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, that she might show some real remorse. But instead, she just shook her head, still trying to justify it. You don't know what it's like, feeling invisible, feeling like no one cares. Invisible? I could barely keep the fury out of my voice. That's rich, coming from the woman who couldn't care less about what I was doing as long as she could go sneak off with her little friend. She looked down again, not even trying to defend herself this time. And for the first time, I realized just how little she respected me, how little she'd valued our life together. I wasn't her husband anymore, I was just some obstacle, some inconvenience she had to sidestep so she could do whatever she wanted. I could feel the last thread of patience slipping away, my mind racing with everything I'd wanted to say but never had the chance. I trusted you, Jenna. I trusted you with everything. And this is what I get in return. Lies, betrayal, and some half-baked excuse about how lonely you were? She finally looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't want it to turn out like this. I let out a bitter laugh, the weight of her words crushing down on me. You didn't want it to turn out like this? Well, congratulations, Jenna. It did. This is where your choices have brought us. And don't you dare try to play the victim here. This is on you. There was a long, heavy silence as she stood there, her hands hanging limply at her sides. She looked defeated, like the reality of what she'd done was finally sinking in. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt nothing but contempt for the woman standing in front of me, the woman who'd lied to my face, who'd put her own selfish desires above everything we'd built together. So, what now? She whispered, barely able to meet my eyes. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. What now? Now, you deal with the consequences. Because I'm done with this, Jenna. I'm done pretending everything's fine, done covering for you, done playing along in this farce of a marriage. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She looked at me, her face pale and tear-streaked, and I could see the fear in her eyes, the panic of realizing she'd finally lost control. But I didn't care. I was done being manipulated, done bending over backward to keep her happy while she lied to my face. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand, like I was finally standing up for myself. And I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. Not this time. I kept myself from letting emotions take over, from shouting, from throwing her mistakes in her face 100 times over. I wanted to make her feel the weight of every lie, every betrayal she'd piled on our marriage. I'd done enough thinking, enough trying to understand her excuses. Now it was my turn to act, and I was ready to make sure she understood exactly how far she'd pushed me. Over the next few days, I started putting together a plan, something she would never see coming. I made sure to keep things calm and controlled at home, for the kids' sake and because I didn't want to give her any warning that I was about to shake things up. I kept up the routine like nothing had happened, asking her about her day, telling her I'd pick up the kids from school, even suggesting we go to her parents' place for dinner that weekend. It all seemed normal to her, and that was exactly what I needed. I knew I'd need help to make this happen, so I called my best friend, Jake, one of the few people I trusted completely. We met up in a quiet bar on the other side of town where I could lay it all out without any prying ears. Jake and I had been friends since high school, and he'd been there for me through every major moment in my life. If anyone would have my back, it was him. Jake, I need you to do something for me, I started, knowing I had his attention. I told him everything. From Jenna's affair with Alex, the excuses she'd fed me, to how she'd turned it all back on me like I was the one to blame. I told him about the confrontation, about how she'd twisted things around, and how she'd shown zero regret. I could see the anger building in Jake's eyes as I spoke, like he was feeling the betrayal right alongside me. Man, I can't believe she'd do this, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. After all these years, after everything you've done for her. Well, she did, I replied, keeping my voice steady. And now, I'm done pretending to forgive her. I need your help with something. I explained the plan, and Jake's expression shifted from anger to something darker: approval. He got it. He understood that this wasn't just about hurting her back, this was about making her face the consequences of every lie she'd told and every bit of trust she'd broken. Jake was the key to pulling this off. I needed someone who could help without drawing attention, someone Jenna wouldn't think twice about if she happened to see him around. Over the next few weeks, we got to work. While Jenna thought things were calm, Jake and I were busy preparing every piece, every step, so that when I was ready, it would all fall into place. First, I went through every financial detail of our life. I knew she'd likely fight me tooth and nail if I went for a divorce, so I made sure to cover myself. I rerouted our joint savings, shifted funds from our joint account to my personal one, and carefully documented everything Jenna had been spending in the last few months: dinners, hotel rooms, and all the little expenses that came with an affair. The evidence was mounting, and I knew it would come in handy if she tried to come after me for a share of the money. I even found a few ways to ensure I'd keep custody of the kids if it came to that. Then, I started setting up her fall. I was patient, methodical, careful to keep my moves subtle so that Jenna wouldn't catch on. Jake helped me organize everything, gathering proof, connecting with the people who could make the plan airtight when it was finally time to pull the trigger. I didn't have any illusions that Jenna would admit to her affair or take responsibility if I confronted her directly. No, she'd just lie, deny, and keep pushing the blame onto me. So I was going to hit her where it hurt. I took a day off work, telling Jenna I needed a break, that I just wanted to spend the day at home to unwind. She barely paid attention, just gave me a half-hearted nod and disappeared into her office to do whatever it was she did there. Once she was out of sight, I went into action. I got into her emails again, taking screenshots, printing everything out, and organizing it into a neat little folder of proof. I wasn't just looking to hold on to these for the divorce, I wanted her to feel exposed, humiliated. She'd kept me in the dark for months, living a lie right under my nose. Now it was her turn to see what that felt like. The night I finally decided to confront her for the second time, I had everything ready. Jake came over, pretending to be stopping by for a quick drink, but he'd actually brought a USB drive with him, the final piece of the plan. On that drive were all the messages and pictures I'd collected, and a letter detailing exactly what Jenna had done and what I planned to do about it. I typed out every lie, every excuse, every time she twisted the truth, and I knew it would hit her like a ton of bricks. When the kids were in bed, Jake and I sat Jenna down in the living room. I could see her confusion, the nervous look she was giving both of us as she tried to figure out what was going on. I didn't let her say a word before I started. "Jenna, I know you're probably wondering why Jake's here tonight," I began, my voice calm and controlled. "But it's time you know that your lies, your secrets, they're all out in the open now." Her eyes went wide, and she opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand, stopping her cold. "Don't even try it," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't a discussion. I've got all the proof right here." I nodded to Jake, who handed her the USB drive. "Everything you thought you could hide, every lie, every work dinner with Alex. I know it all." She went silent, her face turning pale as she looked at the drive, the reality of what was happening sinking in. I watched her fumble with it, her hands shaking as she took it, like she didn't know whether to plug it in or throw it out the window. I didn't give her a choice. "Take a good look, Jenna," I said, my voice hard as steel. "Because once you're done, I want you to understand that this is your life now. I'm done with your excuses, and I'm done playing the fool." I could see Jake standing behind her, his arms crossed, a silent witness to everything, someone who knew exactly what I'd gone through and who wasn't about to let Jenna wriggle her way out of it. She looked at me, eyes filling with a mixture of anger and fear. How could you do this?" she finally spat, her voice trembling with outrage, like I was the one who'd betrayed her. "Are you seriously going to stand there and act like I'm the villain here?" I shot back. "You did this to yourself, Jenna. You're the one who lied, who went behind my back with him, who thought you could live some secret life while I played the loyal husband." She started to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so she'd hear every word. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Her face twisted with shock, then anger. You can't do that. I'm their mother. You can't just throw me out. Oh, I think I can, I said, a smile spreading across my face. I've already filed for divorce, and trust me, I have more than enough evidence to make sure the kids stay with me. I could see the panic in her eyes, her mind racing as she realized the full weight of what I'd set in motion. She shot up from her seat, her voice rising in desperation. You're really going to do this? You're going to destroy everything over a mistake? I shrugged, unfazed. You destroyed everything the second you thought you could keep this secret. You destroyed it when you decided I wasn't enough, when you let another man into your life and lied to my face about it. So yeah, I'm doing this. And I'm not going to stop until you're out of our lives. There was a long silence as she looked between me and Jake, as if searching for some hint that I might change my mind. But I was done. Every lie, every excuse, every insult she'd thrown at me came rushing back, and I knew I wasn't going to give her a second chance. This was the end. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You'll regret this, she said, her voice breaking, as if trying to hurt me with some empty threat. I just looked at her, calm, controlled. I think the only one with regrets here is you, Jenna. After that night, Jenna kept her distance. She tried to stay out of my way, probably too shocked by how everything had unraveled. I could see her every day in that same days, moving quietly around the house like she was invisible, as if that would undo what she'd done. But her silence wasn't good enough for me. She hadn't owned up to a thing, hadn't taken real responsibility, and I wasn't about to let her walk away with her head held high, pretending this had just happened to her. When the weekend rolled around, I told her we were going to have a real talk. No interruptions, no excuses. She didn't argue, didn't fight it. She just looked defeated, nodded, and sat down at the kitchen table across from me. I shut the door so the kids wouldn't hear, though I knew they'd sensed that something was off. Keeping the charade up around them had been the hardest part of this whole ordeal, but I'd managed. I wasn't going to let her lies impact them if I could help it. For a long moment, I just looked at her, trying to remember the person I thought I'd married. All I saw was a stranger, someone who'd put her own desires ahead of everything, who'd smiled in my face while stabbing me in the back. She shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, looking anywhere but at me. When she finally spoke, her voice was a thin whisper. What do you want me to say? I took a breath, keeping my tone steady. I want you to tell me why, Jenna. Why did you throw everything away for him? She hesitated, and I could see the struggle in her face as she tried to find the right words, the excuse that would make it sound like it wasn't her fault. It wasn't about him, okay, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. It was something I needed to feel. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. I shook my head, feeling the anger rise up again. So, you needed to feel something, and that justified betraying me? Sneaking around, lying to my face? No, she stopped, running her hands over her face. It wasn't like that. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't want things to end up this way. Didn't want things to end up this way? I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. You wanted a distraction, right? Something to make you feel alive? Because our life, our family, our home, that wasn't enough for you? Her face twisted with a mixture of guilt and anger. I don't expect you to understand. You've never known what it's like to feel like you're just going through the motions. To feel like no one even sees you. I leaned back, crossing my arms. No, Jenna, you're right. I don't know what it's like to feel invisible because I never chose to be. I stayed here. I showed up every day for you, for the kids. I never checked out or went looking for a way out. Her eyes flashed, some of that old fire back in them. You think it was easy for me? You think I didn't struggle? You're not the only one who felt trapped, Mark. So why didn't you say something? I demanded. Why didn't you come to me and talk about whatever it was you were feeling? You think I wouldn't have listened? She scoffed, a bitter sound. Listened? Mark, you're always so busy with work, with your own problems. You barely even noticed I was there half the time. Right, I said, nodding. So this is my fault. I was too focused on work, too distracted, too wrapped up in everything else. And that gave you permission to lie, to cheat, to bring someone else into our marriage. She clenched her jaw, looking away. I didn't say it was your fault. I'm just saying, maybe if you'd been around more, things would have been different. I felt the last shred of patience snap. Don't even try to twist this on me, Jenna. Don't you dare. I was here, every day, putting in the effort, trying to keep things going. And you? You were off playing house with him, laughing and smiling like it didn't matter that you were married, that you had a family. You broke everything we had, and you have the nerve to act like it's my fault? Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw the defeat in her eyes. I don't know why I did it, she murmured. Maybe I was just selfish. Maybe I wanted to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. I don't have some big answer for you, Mark. I made a mistake. I shook my head slowly, unable to believe what I was hearing. A mistake? That's what you call it? You were sneaking around for months. You lied every single day, and you call it a mistake? She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if she'd finally run out of excuses. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to admit that you cared more about yourself than you did about this family, I said, my voice steady. I want you to own up to the fact that you put your own needs ahead of everything we built together. That this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A choice you made, day after day, every time you met him, every time you lied to my face. She looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. Not after everything. Fine, she said, her voice breaking. You're right. I was selfish. I thought I could have both, that I could have this and still feel something different, something exciting. I let the words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them, the finality. Well, you got what you wanted, didn't you? I said coldly. You wanted excitement, something new. And you got it. But you lost everything else in the process. Her face crumpled, and I could see the regret in her eyes, the realization of what she'd done. But it was too late. There was no going back. I'd given her the chance to explain, to make things right, and she'd failed. And now she was reaping the consequences. What about the kids? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What are we going to tell them? I stared at her, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. We're going to tell them the truth, Jenna. That we're getting a divorce, and that it's for the best. I'm not going to lie to them, not after everything you've done. They deserve honesty, even if you don't. She looked away, the guilt and shame written all over her face. I never wanted it to end like this. I stood up, done with the conversation, done with her excuses. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to throw everything away. I left her sitting there, alone at the table, as I walked out of the room. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together, it was gone, shattered by her choices, by her betrayal. I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me, knowing that I was finally free, that I didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to keep up the charade. Later that night, I sat down with the kids and told them the truth, or at least as much of it as they needed to know. I kept it simple, explaining that their mom and I had grown apart, that we both thought it would be better if we didn't live together anymore. They were confused, of course, but I reassured them, told them that they'd still see both of us, that we'd still be there for them, even if things were going to be different. Jenna stayed quiet, didn't try to argue or interfere. Maybe she finally realized the damage she'd done, or maybe she just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Either way, I could see the resignation in her eyes, the understanding that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. After we tucked the kids into bed, Jenna and I sat down one last time. She looked exhausted, like the weight of everything was finally settling on her shoulders. So, what now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Now, I replied, keeping my tone steady. Now, we go our separate ways. We'll work out the details, get the paperwork sorted, and move on. There's nothing left here, Jenna. No trust, no respect. You made sure of that. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I took a long moment before answering, letting the silence stretch between us. No, I finally said. I don't think I ever will. She looked away, her face crumpling as the reality hit her, as she finally understood the weight of what she'd lost. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I couldn't. This was the life she'd chosen, the path she'd carved out with every lie, every secret, every time she'd put herself before our family. The next morning, Jenna packed her things and left, a quiet, somber departure without any final words or goodbyes. And as she walked out the door, I felt a strange sense of closure, a release from everything she'd put me through. She was gone, out of my life, and I was finally free. Free to start over, free to rebuild, free to find something real. The first morning after Jenna left was eerily quiet. I hadn't slept much, but I was up early, sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee, staring at the spot where she'd sat during that last conversation. The kids were still asleep, and for the first time, it really sank in. This was my life now. Just me and the kids, in the house we'd bought together, in a life that she'd walked away from. I felt the weight of everything: anger, disappointment, the emptiness of a marriage destroyed. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new routine. It wasn't easy. The kids had questions, some they asked, others I could see weighing on their faces even if they didn't say them out loud. They wanted to know why their mom had left, why things were different, and I struggled to give them answers that wouldn't make them resent her. I told them it was complicated, that sometimes people just grow apart, that we still loved them, even if we weren't together anymore. It was a balancing act, trying to shield them from the truth while not pretending everything was okay. I spent a lot of time thinking about what had happened, running it over in my head like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the memories that now felt tainted. I tried to understand how we'd reached this point, what signs I'd missed, what more I could have done. But eventually, I stopped asking those questions. The truth was, nothing would change what she'd done. Nothing would make her choices any less selfish, or the betrayal any easier to swallow. And there was something freeing in that, a strange kind of acceptance. She'd made her choice, and now I was making mine. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of her mistakes. I wasn't going to be defined by her betrayal. I had the kids to think about, and they needed me to be present, not caught up in a spiral of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I wasn't going to let her mistakes ruin me or the life I was building with them. A few months later, I found myself looking at the world in a new way. Things that I'd taken for granted or barely noticed before were suddenly different. I took the kids out more, tried new things with them: weekend road trips, movie marathons, things Jenna had always brushed off as too much effort or not her style. We got closer as a family, in ways I hadn't expected. The kids adjusted to the new normal, and I did too. Slowly, life started to feel less like a painful reminder of what I'd lost and more like a fresh start. I also started noticing the people around me more. Friends and neighbors reached out, offering support, invites to dinners, even just to talk. It amazed me how many people were willing to be there, to listen, to make sure I wasn't alone. Jake, my best friend, was a constant presence, dropping by on weekends, inviting me to watch games, keeping me from sinking into the bitterness that could have easily swallowed me whole. And little by little, I began to feel like myself again. Not the man who'd been cheated on, but the man who had survived it and was moving forward. As for Jenna, she stayed out of our lives for the most part. She saw the kids occasionally, weekends or short visits when she felt like it, but it was clear she was still wrapped up in her own world. I could see the toll it took on the kids, the confusion in their eyes when she'd cancel last minute or show up late, acting like nothing had happened. I let them process it in their own way, trying to be there for them without bad-mouthing her. It wasn't easy. Some nights I wanted to tell them everything, to lay bare the truth about why she'd left, about what she'd done. But I knew that wouldn't help them. They needed stability, not more drama. They needed to know they were loved, even if their mother was too wrapped up in herself to show it. Then, one afternoon, Jenna called me. It had been months since we'd had any real conversation, outside of arranging times for her to see the kids. Her voice was hesitant, almost awkward, and I could tell right away that this wasn't just a casual call. "Mark, I wanted to talk. I know things have been difficult, but I wanted to see if we could, I don't know, clear the air." I took a breath, steeling myself. I'd known this conversation might come, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever version of closure she thought she could offer. "Clear the air?" I said, keeping my voice calm. "What exactly do you think there is to clear, Jenna?" She hesitated. "I know I hurt you, and I know I made a lot of mistakes. I guess I wanted to apologize. To try and explain." I waited, letting her speak, though I wasn't sure what she could say that would make a difference now. "I wasn't happy, Mark," she continued, her voice thick with some kind of emotion, though I couldn't tell if it was regret or just guilt. "I felt trapped, like I was stuck in this life that wasn't really mine. And I know that's no excuse for what I did, but I guess I thought you should know." I shook my head, feeling a strange mixture of pity and frustration. "Jenna, if you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. You could have told me instead of lying, instead of going behind my back. You had options, but you chose the one that hurt the most." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." I let out a long breath, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. Her apology didn't change anything, didn't erase the damage she'd done. But somehow, hearing it, acknowledging it, made me feel lighter. Like a weight I'd been carrying was finally gone. I didn't forgive her, not in the way she probably wanted, but I realized that I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. I'd been moving forward, and this was just another step in that journey. "Thank you for saying that," I finally replied, my voice steady. "But it doesn't change anything. We're done, Jenna. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her nodding on the other end. "I understand," she said quietly. I hope we can be civil, for the kids." "We already are," I replied, my tone firm. "And that's enough." After that call, I felt a strange sense of closure. I didn't need to dwell on what she'd done or why she'd done it. I didn't need her explanations or her excuses. I'd already made my peace with it. She was part of my past now, and my future was mine to shape. It was a Sunday afternoon when I walked into my own house and felt like a stranger. We had family over for my wife Jenna's birthday, a small gathering, just close friends and family in the backyard. It was one of those easy, sunny afternoons that makes you feel like everything is exactly where it should be. Burgers were on the grill, kids were running around, and I was busy grabbing a cooler of drinks from the garage. I stepped back into the kitchen and paused at the doorway when I saw Jenna. She was talking to someone just out of sight in the living room, but her tone was softer than usual, like she was trying to keep her voice down. I thought nothing of it at first, she was always on her phone or chatting up someone. But then I heard her laugh. Not just any laugh, either. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months, maybe years, one that caught me off guard. It was real, almost flirtatious, with a hint of something I hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. I leaned a bit closer, trying to see who was there. Then he stepped into view, a guy I'd met just once or twice before, Jenna's new colleague, Alex. He wasn't even supposed to be here. I vaguely remembered Jenna inviting him last minute because he had nowhere else to go for the weekend. He was younger, fit, and just a little too comfortable standing in my living room, laughing with my wife like he belonged there. Something about it hit me wrong. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, or maybe it was just that the laugh wasn't meant for me. I shook it off, joining everyone outside, handing out beers, chatting with our friends, acting normal. But as the day went on, I couldn't unsee it, the way her eyes would drift back toward the house whenever she thought no one was looking. I tried to brush it off, that strange feeling gnawing at me. But something kept tugging at me, refusing to let go. I told myself it was paranoia.
A bad vibe. A misunderstanding.
But no matter how much I reasoned with myself, every small moment from that day stuck like splinters in my mind.